Hello everyone, and welcome back to our SharePoint Site Administration Primer series here with IT Training. My name is Andy Hunsucker, and today we're going to be looking at managing SharePoint lists and libraries. So we had a chance to talk about what lists and libraries actually are, what they're capable of doing. Let's go ahead and talk about how to work with those in a real SharePoint site. Now, when you are building a SharePoint site, you might think, oh, we have to change everything that we do in order to fit into what SharePoint does. That is the wrong way to go about it. When you're building a SharePoint site, the main idea is to create a site that reflects your business. Okay? You should not change your practices to match SharePoint. Instead, you should change SharePoint to match your practices. That is the key thing, and that's what SharePoint is really all about. It is incredibly flexible, and we'll see some examples of that a little bit later on. So you build your SharePoint site out of lists and libraries are built out of columns. Okay, so a column is made up out of a data type and a name. Each column can contain a different type of information. We talked about a little bit of those earlier. Every list and library also includes a default column called title. Okay, so that title column is non-negotiable. All right, you cannot get rid of it. However, you can rename it. Okay, so this is the key. SharePoint is hierarchical, and everything is based off of this one certain item, this one thing called item, and item is the basis for all SharePoint lists and libraries. Everything you create is based off the item. And what that includes is one field named title. Now, you could dig into the SharePoint guts and change the name of that one field to something else. However, then all of your lists and libraries will have one thing called something else. So you have to be very careful with that. Now, you can rename that title column, which is my preferred way to do it. The column type is a single line of text, which pretty much every single SharePoint list or library I've ever dealt with required at least one thing that was a single line of text. Okay, so you can rename that title field into something else and use it for something different, and that's really how you should deal with that. Some various column types that we have access to: a single or multiple line of text, a choice, which allows you to choose multiple options that you select. You determine what the different choices are in that case. There's a number, different types of numbers, currencies, dates and times. It can either be a date or the date and the time together. It can't just be the time. You can also do a lookup field, which actually looks up information from another list, which makes SharePoint work a little bit more like a database. Let's be very clear about one thing, though. SharePoint is not a database system. You can connect it to database systems, but it is not a traditional database system. Okay? You can also just use a simple yes/no checkbox, or you can use a person or group. There's some other ones in here that we have access to that I'm not listing here. Site columns are very useful. So most columns are created at the list or library level. So if you need an extra column to deal with a piece of information, you can create it right at that list level. But what if you use a certain type of column so often that you really need you just find yourself creating it over and over and over again? Well, that is a good time to introduce a site column. Now, site columns you can actually create at the site level, and that means that they are going to be able to be used in any list or library throughout the entire site. We talked earlier about the SharePoint hierarchy and how that works. Using site columns can add consistency to an overall site design. Imagine that you have a business with various divisions, and those divisions have certain names. And you need to know where that division, whatever this document is, what division it came from. You could have a site column that allowed you to select which division. Now, if you're going to count on different people to create that column in every single list, it's possible they change the name slightly of each particular division or capitalize it differently and that sort of thing. If you use a site column that is division name, and you already have those choices pre-filtered and they already appear at the site level, then you're not going to have that problem. It's going to add a nice consistency. So when should you use a cite column versus when you should use a list column? So cite columns are appropriate when the information will be needed for multiple lists, like I just said, that example that I just gave. If you've got a certain type of information that's just used all over the site that you always need to know, you should create a cite column for that. List columns are very appropriate when the column is only needed for a specific list. Okay, so if you really need it just for this one list, or maybe even just like one or two lists, I would probably say you can go ahead and use a list column. But let's go ahead and take a look at some examples of cite and list columns. All right, let's talk about columns. And we've seen a lot of columns already, but we really want to dig in and see how these columns can help us create our SharePoint site. And I'm looking at the book right now. I'm on page 110 if you want to follow along. And I'm going to go to the Shared Documents folder. We're going to create a column in here. And I'm going to go ahead and click the Library tab. And then I can just create a column. And there's a little button right there. I can create a column. And I'm going to go ahead and call this Release Status. And this is going to be a choice menu, a choice column here. You can see all these different columns. These are all described in your book between pages like 112 to 122. And you can talk, sort of learn about all of them. They're all reasonably straightforward. We're going to go ahead and add some choices here. And I'm not going to add a description, but you can when you it's a good idea to add descriptions because later on, you will not remember why you created this particular column, and you will need to remember. So it's good to add a description at all times. I'm not going to do it today, though, just because we need to get moving here. So I'll give it a few possible release states, alpha, beta, and final. We're going to display the drop-down choices using radio buttons. We're going to not allow fill-in choices. Basically what that means is that are we going to let people just type in whatever they feel like? No, we're not. And the default choice can be alpha. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And you'll see that now the new release status column has been added. Now, when you add a new document, it's going to, let's see here. Well, it's going to give you the default version of this. But if I add a new document here, I can add this one. You can see when I add a new document, it gives me this new window because there's new information that's required. So I'll call this a beta, and I can give it a title as well. Title and name are different in that the title is, can be different than the name. Maybe the name is sort of an internal thing, and the title is a little more descriptive, a little less technical. And I can save that. And then it's there, and you can see the release status. Now, if I edit one of these other documents, then I'm going to have to do that again, which I don't want to have to do. So that's a list column. It is very specific to this list and only this list, and we don't need to worry about it anywhere else. But what if we have a column that would be useful in other locations? Other lists, other libraries. Well, that's when we can get the cite columns involved. So I'm going to go ahead and create a cite column. We're going to walk you through this. This is on page 125. I'm going to click the Cite Actions menu here, and I'm going to go to Site Settings. This is how I get to this location. Under Galleries, I can click Cite Columns. So when you get in here, you can see that there's lots and lots of columns here, that these all exist. These are things that you could use at any point that are, part of different default lists. We're going to go ahead and we are going to click the Create button right here. We're going to create a new column, and this one is going to be called Corporate Regions. I'm going to call it Corporate Regions. This is going to be another choice. And remember, this is one that's going to be used all across the entire site. So lots of different lists are going to be able to make use of this. And this is a good one here. I'm going to create a new group for this. Corporate Columns. And the choices are going to be Canada, US, Europe, Asia and Africa. Very diverse corporation here. We are going to require that this contains information, and for the choice here, I'm going to remove that. I'm just going to have it be blank, so there isn't a default choice. I'll go ahead and click OK. And now if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that corporate regions is now there. So what that does for us is that gives us this single column with all the regions for our corporation. And if that changes, if at some point we decide, you know what, our corporation now has offices in Antarctica, we can just add that. Or if we decide, you know what, these regions are not accurate anymore, let's change them all to different ones, we can change that. So that will be very helpful. But one more thing to do here. We're going to add this to a list. So I'm going to go to my shared documents list. And I'm going to, in the library field, I'm going to click Library Settings. So I need to dig in here. This is on page 127, moving over to page 128 of the book. And I'm going to scroll down here to columns. Now I can create a column from here, or I can add from existing site columns. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I can sort of scroll down here in the site columns. I'm going to select from corporate columns. There's only one there, and I'll add it, and I'll click OK. And now it is listed here under corporate regions. And if I go back to shared documents here, I can see it's right there. Let me go ahead and edit this, whoops, not the document, edit the properties of this document. And then you can see I can add corporate regions. Let's make it Canada. Now, this can be very useful in the grand scheme of things when you have access to, a lot of information. You can sort of sort everything by corporate region, and that can be very useful. All right, so that's going to be it. There's no additional material for this section. The next video, we're going to talk about views, and views are incredibly powerful. It's going to be great. So thank you guys very much for watching.